Hello, everybody. My name is Blake Eskin. I am I guess I'm a journalist or recovering journalist is what I like to talk about myself as. I spent about 20 years as an editor, beginning before the internet changed all of journalism, and then ended up working kind of on the web at sort of, as an editor, but also at the intersection of, I guess, editorial and product, like editorial products development and stuff like that. About 5 or 6 years ago, my last job was at the New Yorker magazine, and I was their web editor. So I was, again, some of it was like building a newsroom and getting the New Yorker out into other media than print and other rhythms than weekly, and finding ways to do that within a limited budget. But the story I want to start with is actually the thing I did first when I left, is that I started complaining about a problem in my neighborhood. I live in Prospect Heights, and I noticed that Prospect Heights got a really nice Italian restaurant and a really crummy Chinese restaurant. And I was trying to basically, I started this petition, I guess, and it was called Prospect Heights Deserves Better Chinese Food. And it was, I was like, why people in the neighborhood can afford a nice Italian meal, and yet we still have like a restaurant with bulletproof glass in it, or one of those restaurants that sells like Chinese food and sushi and pad thai, and none of them are really that good. And like, I think we could support a better restaurant, and why isn't this happening? And so I thought of this as like a lark, but then I also started, I also started reading like the Lean Startup. I don't know if you've heard of this concept of the Lean. Has anybody not heard of the Lean Startup? I don't know if you talk about this at all. Basically, it's a different. Yeah. So instead of like, I need to start. Used to be like, you'd start ESPN the magazine. And in order to start ESPN the magazine, you do all this research as a big company and figure out it's going to take $50 million of investment in 7 years to be profitable. And companies would do this, and they would, and that's how new magazines used to come out. Now, to make a new magazine, you can start an Instagram feed and spend no money and figure out if there's an audience and if you can connect with that audience. And so that's kind of the idea of the Lean Startup. So do as little as possible to figure out if there is demand or interest for what you are doing. And so anyway, so I started a petition. I started talking to strangers on the platform of the subway. I ordered like business cards, which had the URL for the petition, and that was my $10 investment in this project. I met neighbors through this. I, got invited into people's homes. I had more than 100 signatures in about 3 weeks. And then Patch got in touch with me. Patch is a local, hyper-local news website. And so they did a story. And then I got a call from the New York Post. And I talked to the New York Post, which I don't always recommend, but I talked to the New York Post just because I was like, what are they going to do, And then the next thing I knew, I got a Google alert from some newspaper in China that it was like, Chinese characters, Prospect Heights deserves better Chinese food, Chinese characters, Blake Eskin. So like my campaign went international. And so I was trying to figure out what to do after the New Yorker, and I was talking to a friend who had been a journalist and moved into product. And he was like, Blake, I want you to come speak at my conference about product development. And the title of your presentation is Optimizing for Better Chinese Food Through Lean Startup Techniques. And so I started giving, so he's like, you've got 5 minutes to give the presentation. And so again, like I come out of a journalism background, so I'm used to like telling stories, getting opinions. Success is like publication, getting people talking, whatever. But I'm like, okay, I'll try this. And so I go give, it's like one of these, like you get 20 seconds and 20 slides, and it's like 5 minutes and 32 seconds, whatever the length of it. But it's like very calibrated presentation. And so I did kind of like an imitation of a, I took a lot of pictures of my neighborhood. I didn't have a lot of words in it, but I was like, I showed my petition. I went through the story I told you about how this went viral. I showed like the mayonnaise shop on Vanderbilt Avenue, the artisanal mayonnaise shop, and I'm like, if we can support an artisanal mayonnaise shop, we could support a better Chinese restaurant. And then I was like, and then I got to this, I got to this sort of idea about scale, that like, now if I can figure that out for Prospect Heights, then we can solve this problem in the Upper West Side and in Jersey City and in all of these other communities, and like I will have found through this lean method like the secret to bringing better Chinese food to everybody's neighborhood, and everybody will benefit. And one of the things I learned too also is just like white people like Chinese food, black people like Chinese food, mixed people like Chinese food, Asian people like Chinese food, Indian people, like everybody likes Chinese food. Conservatives and liberals, it's not like a divisive issue that way. Like it's something that brings people together. So I talk about all this, and at the end of my presentation, 2 people came up to me separately and said, I loved your talk, good luck starting your restaurant. And so that is the story I want to start with, because like I didn't think I was starting a restaurant. I thought I was doing something, and I thought I was entertaining people. I thought I was telling a story. I thought I was like kind of playing with this format. But the idea I got from that is like telling stories is building a business. And that is the point I want to make. It's like and you may all be familiar with some of this. Like I had a problem. This is why I decided I was going to make this. Like this is the problem my product solves. I don't know if you've sort of talked about it this way, but like often that's the, where do you get your inspiration for new ideas?
Problem statement, and they
right.
try to be aware of cognitive bias they might have going into
Yep.
developing that problem
Right.
statement.
Right. But you have a problem. Everybody starts with a problem statement. It's too hard to tie your shoes. There's not good Chinese food in the neighborhood. All of these things. And that then, so you have a problem and you articulate your problem and you think about how your product is a solution to that problem. And storytelling works a lot the same way. So you are finding, you're finding people want to hear about conflicts. They want to hear about problems and how they do or don't get resolved or how they should get resolved. So basically, like, I didn't think I was starting a restaurant, but according to Lean Startup, I was starting a restaurant. And if I had, and in a different version of today's talk, I would be speaking to you as, the competitor to Panda Express or something like that, like the emperor of all these Chinese restaurants. And I didn't want to do that business. I didn't want to do, but like I understood the central need of having a compelling story for people. And like I learned through talking to people, talking first to my friends, first to my wife, who thought I was a little crazy, and then to friends, some of whom were more amused, and then to strangers on the subway platform. And like I basically like through this process, with some positive and some embarrassing press, through this process, I developed a story, and it got better every time I told it. And that is what you all need to do with your products that you are making. So I leave the New Yorker, and while pursuing this Chinese food project, I end up at, I join a startup, and I am the one non-technical person there, the one non-coder. It was a mobile magazine, mobile publishing project. This was about 2012. It was the time when people had hope that the iPad magazine would become a viable way of selling content, because or selling writing, especially because there are very few viable ways of selling writing right now. And so I did that for about a year. And so I was there as the editorial director. And I'd always been, the other thing that's weird about journalism is that for the most part, now we teach journalists how to think about business, or just to realize that they are in a business. But then journalism was like well enough paid for that you didn't have to think that way. You could just think about I cover the environment for my newspaper, and somebody else worries about the advertising. So but like, that's, so it's almost like being a poet or an actor or something, and I'm just totally supposed to like focus on your craft. But this new experience threw me into the need to tell this story. And a lot of the work I did for the first 4 or 5 months was writing a presentation over and over and over and over again. And the presentation was basically about the presentation, like, we had to figure out who we were telling our story to, and we started with one presentation. And so we had kind of like independent publishers who were coming to us, like websites, or people who wanted to start something that was a website but didn't want to get into like ad-supported publishing. We also were trying to raise money, and we were trying to raise money in we kept saying we want to talk to VCs, we don't want to talk to VCs. There are angel investors who are not, I don't know how much you've talked about the universe of investors.
No.
So like people invest for all sorts of reasons. Some of them, particularly in media, invest for influence. They want to, think that there is too much of a left-wing bias in the liberal media, and so they want to put money into something that will allow a voice to come out. Or they are a successful, Latino business person who really wants a magazine for, the younger generation to learn to be, successful Latino business person. And they, so some of it is about influence. Some of it is about changing the world. They think that things should be different, that like we should have a world where writers are compensated for their work. And some of it is about, it's not necessarily greed, but it's about money. Some investors are like, I am putting money into 30 companies, and because one of those companies is going to make 100 times what I invest in it for me. And so I'm going to take a lot of long shots. And so, so we were looking for investors, and part of what is, and so we had 2 big audiences then. We had like people who were going to be our more like partners than customers. We had like content producers, and then we had investors. And we tried the same presentation with both of them, and it was a disaster. And the first time we went into one of my favorite sentences from the process was when our CEO turned to me and he said, "Never mention proofreading in front of a venture capitalist again." And the reason for that is proofreading is a human process that takes time and costs money and can't be automated. And so it was like, even if we said we didn't want, and like what they're focused on, because again, if you're trying to get like businesses that could one day be billion-dollar businesses, because that's what a lot of venture capitalists are looking for, they You know, they really need to hear a story that sees you not just like, that sees you going like this and not just going like this. And they need that kind of like, and so anything that is anything that involves, that can't be automated, they see as an impediment to this. And so we ended up developing different presentations for different people. And then, of course, we had to have a story for the audience of each publication because we wanted to sell those. So like the target, so it ended up being like starting with one presentation, and there was something literary about it. We told a story about, like, has anybody heard of a magazine called The Tatler? It's a British publication, and it is actually named after the very first magazine ever, which came out in like 1709. And so we had this whole routine about how our product was just like the very first magazine ever. And that's how we told the story, and we believed that. And it had, you know, it was like a different version of that. But essentially we were getting back to the essence of what the magazine was, and that was kind of like that was the soul of our pitch. And that spoke really well to a certain kind of publisher, you know, but not necessarily every publisher. And even in that company, when I was doing work that was less directly, even when I was doing things like, I ended up doing some project management, which I don't consider one of my strengths. But I had to get people to use, I had to get our publishers to use a project management tool. And I even found that I had to develop a script and a story and an interactive experience for that to make it work well. So stories move people along. Stories keep people moving. I also realized, like, I'd been an entrepreneur before. Like, I'd worked on, you know, whether it was like bringing the New Yorker onto the web or other, the website I worked on before that, or even just pitching individual stories. Like, I was always pitching. I was always saying to people, this is, you know, I found something interesting. You should pay attention to it. And the reason you should pay attention to it is because it's in your magazine. And in your magazine, this is what you do, and this is why this is perfect for your magazine. The other thing I learned is that you never know why you are having a meeting. At 29th Street at the mobile magazine publisher, there were a lot of times where I thought I was having a meeting to pitch someone to start publishing a magazine, and they thought they were having a meeting to come apply for a job, even though we didn't talk about it that way. And sometimes even like, even though like you never know why you're talking. And often, like when you're an approaching investor, the best thing there's a sort of cliche, and many cliches are true, is like when you're asking for advice, tell them you're asking for money. And where you're asking for money, tell them that you want advice. I don't know if you've heard that one before.
No, what do you mean by that?
So like if you're going, because like investors, you know, they meet with people all the time. So like investors can either offer you, sometimes people don't like to be directly asked for money, or to realize they are, or they know they're being asked. Or, you know, maybe you've asked a relative for money and you know that you're really going to them and you're saying, you know, Dad, can I have a hug? But really what you need is $20 and the keys to the car. And like, Dad doesn't want to feel like all you need is $20 and the keys to the car. So I think that's part of it. And then part of it is also like people who, I mean, investing is many things, including luck, and people who invest don't always like to admit how big a factor luck is, and so they have made wise choices, and you are going to a wise person to ask for their wisdom. And part of their wisdom might be them coming to the realization that they want to support you beyond just wisdom. Although, you know, so, I guess I'm asking separately because I still don't like. I like what you've picked a good problem to solve. There are people solving parts of the problem, as you said, and like, I don't know what yet you're trying to do, and you don't know yet what you're trying to do, which is fine. But like, is it that you need like, even if you don't, you need an answer for what you need the money for. So like, we need 3 months, we need server space in the cloud to store our data that we're collecting so we can figure things out. We need, 3 months of childcare so that I can meet once a week with my team. It's like there's something that you're asking for. And like, and in general, like there's always a story of what you're asking for money for. Like if you ever look at TechCrunch, do any of you ever look at TechCrunch? TechCrunch is a website that reports on, thank you, you can sit down, I don't mean to keep you. So TechCrunch is a website that reports on startups, and one of the things they will do is say, like, they'll run a story and they'll say there's this company, like I have a friend who has a company called KitSplit, and it is a equipment sharing site, rental site for the film and video business. So you need a drone for 2 days to film your commercial, whatever, and like you own a drone privately or you have a small business. So anyway, they just raised money, and they have a stated reason for raising money, and their stated reason for raising their Series A round, which is like $2.5 million, is that they're trying to really expand, I think, nationally, especially in the Los Angeles market, because Los Angeles is where a lot of commercials and TV and video are shot. So like, will all that money go there? I don't know. But part of in the same way that Carl was saying about like, you need to know where you want to end up, you also need to have a story for why you need the money. And like this, I realize the pitch presentation you have is a little different. It's not like you're like, it's not who makes the best argument for needing $1,200 or some share of that. It's more of like a...
No, but this raises important questions, and it's just good techniques to like learn what questions to ask, how to respond. And I love that a lot of you guys were non-defensive in how you responded, and instead were just thoughtful and composed. Like, I really admired that and stuff. And this is very difficult. Like, you really feel exposed, you really feel on the spot. And you guys really did a great job with it, and it's a real great growth opportunity. So I think what you're doing is invaluable. It's really asking them. It's like exactly, I think, the stage that they're ready for. Even if it's uncomfortable, it's like how you truly grow is when you have the courage to be uncomfortable, and you just, you go through it.
And having worked at both early and late stage startups, which have had what the business calls challenges, which is that it only gets harder in some ways. Like, or you need to be able to, like, as an entrepreneur, you need to be able to live with the uncertainty or the ambiguity. Like, that doesn't go away. Like, and which isn't to say like that's a sign of failure. It is about being comfortable in the face of uncertainty. And that is what, I mean, on some level, that's like the most important lesson of adulthood, because like, school has rules. Graduate school has rules. You get what do you win if you win graduate school? You win the degree and maybe the job, and but like, entrepreneurship doesn't have rules in the same way. Like, I mean, there's like, you need to, I mean, the rule is you need to keep the lights on and you need to keep the people who are working for you paid and make them secure that they're going to get paid every 2 weeks.
We talked, so last session 3 weeks ago, our guest speaker was someone who had a comfortable six-figure salary job at a consulting firm, and he also felt like he just wasn't inspired and he wasn't happy. And so he's someone who's had a lot of talents that he wanted to use in an industry he was passionate about. And so he put together an executive summary, got a $300,000 loan to invest in his business, and now 2 years later it's starting to earn a surplus. But he also said even though it was scary and risky, he's so much happier, you know, and he was a real role model, you know, and a real inspiration for me and stuff. And so that's kind of, we talk about these risks, but it's also like you're doing it so that you can like be in that 11% of people that feel like their life is actually contributing, or their job contributes to their life. 89% literally report on these as a career development professional say that their job does not contribute to the betterment of their life.
I would also argue that even a healthy six-figure salary at a consulting firm is worth, like, I don't know that it is not, we do not live in the 1950s anymore, and that is not a guarantee that he is the master of his own destiny.
Right.
And so, like, part of one of the things I've learned in the last 5 years is that there is not a lot of stability in all jobs, especially if you're working in new companies or you're working in companies that are being disrupted by new companies. And that's pretty much everybody at this point. So, you know, so there's not, like, you can have architectural skills, but that is not a guarantee of like a stable up and to the right, you know, life where you're going to have, you know, like things, you know, on some level, like yes, one of the CEOs I worked with described it as being like eating glass every day, but he was happier because he never wanted to work for somebody that he didn't agree with again. Right. And he was, you know, that was a tremendous motivation for him. So anyway, good luck. I hope you all get to share in the prize. And as Carl was saying, this is hard. Like, I mean, you know, like comedians and stand-ups practice for a decade and still feel like they're eating glass. So anyway, good luck. Thanks for talking to me.